Today we're going to be talking about the addictions of love. Now, what are addictions of love all about? Well, I'm going to suggest addictions of love are what we call false intimacy. It's that you have needs, and primarily in this area, the need is going to be a need in the area of love. That's why they're called addictions of love. And due to certain reasons, like maybe fear of rejection, or ways you look at things, or the way you feel about things, you're going to try to get that need met by focusing on one particular type of love or one particular situation to the exclusion of the rest, to sort of make it all work out and make it feel like you're loved and make it like you're okay. Now, what are the different types of love or intimacy? Let's look at that first. First, we have romantic love. And romantic love, the word there in the Greek is eros. And this is sort of the thrill. This is the seeking. This is the chase. You finally found somebody that loves you, and it's great, and it's wonderful. This is the feelings. Then we have the unconditional commitment and acceptance. This is really the attachment of what is going on. And that's agape. And then we have the friendship. This is the companionship. The word for this is phileo. Then we have the spiritual intuition, the really feeling the common goals. This is theleo, T-H-E-L-E-O. And then we have physical love, which is sexual. And we have all of those, and we need all of those to make this package together where I feel accepted, where I feel loved, where I have those relationships, where my love tank is full. And they all have a place. We put all those things together. If you think about it, it's the romance, the attraction that initializes what's going on. And then it's the phileo, the common goals, the theleo, and the commitment that stabilize the relationship. And then it's the physical love that cements it into an intimate relationship. So we're going to look at three different types, basically, of addictions of love. If you want to read more of this, there's a book called The Addictions of Love. You can get more information on some of these from. The first one is romance addiction. And as we're going through this, I want you guys to think about how many people you know out there that actually have these symptoms and have these particular problems. The first thing we look at, if you just want to have little red flags to say romance addiction, soap operas, romance novels, and many, many relationships that last for short periods of time. Because what are they looking for? The thrill of the romance, the thrill of the chase. After the thrill of the chase is over, that's the hard work. So they have a number of other suitors waiting in the wings, and as soon as they're bored with you, they go on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Over and over again. What would be another place we might find these people? On the internet. Many times they will give sex for the romance to try and get the situation. They might be on the chat rooms with the video cameras, having internet sex and other stuff to draw the people. One particular client I had that got stuck in this, her husband broke the code to her emails. She had 5 guys going at once. But you see, it really wasn't for the relationships. It's for the thrill. Wouldn't you ladies feel, wow, you're really somebody if you have 5 guys that want you at once? See how this works? It's a substitute for the real thing. But if you get enough of it, it sort of feels like the real thing. That's what we're really talking about here. What would be another reason that a person might go this direction? Fear of rejection. Hey, if I can just get them all thrilled and they all want me and so on, I don't have to stay with them, I never get rejected. You know, I'm just chase. They seek what they cannot have because they cannot face what they really want. And they're never going to have it. Are they ever going to be satisfied? Remember about addictions? Short-term high, long-term loss. How many breakups are they going to have? Of course, you realize they usually break up with the other people so the other people don't leave them so they don't feel so bad, right? Intoxicated with the chase. Many times with married men because they don't really want the relationship, and that way they got a good excuse. Oh, you're married, so that's not going to work. We don't have to get married. Blame others for driving them to it. Believe they have greater needs for intimacy than other people, but settle for the fix out of fear. They need to be in control, which prevents intimacy. Are they going to really be open and tell you very much about themselves? No, they're going to have a facade because they don't want you to really know who they are. They may have a lie. They may not be telling you anything that's true at all. They're just looking for the chase. Unable to commit to real marriage. Secretly, they sort of ideal lovers. What they would tell you is, I've never met the guy that was good enough for me. They just don't match up to what they really want. They invest no more than is necessary to get the gratification. Once they're won, the victim is abandoned for another chase. Short-lived, commitment is impossible. The more unobtainable the person is, the greater the thrill. If I could just get the president to come after me. Know somebody like that? Hidden self-life. They live two lives. And that romance addiction that compensates for the fear. Okay, that's one. Get that picture? Next picture is relationship addiction. Now this looks very different from romance addiction. Because in relationship addiction, you can't get rid of them. Because they're so desperate for that relationship, no matter whether it's abusive, domestically violent, they're being used, the guy's got 15 affairs going at the same time. Are they going to leave? No, because out of the fear of abandonment. They're going to feel worthless if they leave, and they'll stay there. It's like codependency, but it's worse. Because this acts more like an addiction. Codependency is a basis for addictions, but this is stronger than codependency. One of the questions to ask someone if you want to determine this is, what is the longest time in your life you've ever been without a relationship? If the relationship addict, it's going to be like a week or a day or maybe never. The other's role is that of an emotional provider. They're hooked on attaching to another that provides external affirmation. Many times the other person will be their protector, their bodyguard. Now they have to have them that way. They'd be too afraid. Their needs, their emotions get met by being in a relationship with somebody else. Usually it combines over and under responsible people, controlling versus neediness. So many times the mate will be a controller, a my way or the highway type of person, but they can't leave them. And so they'll just put up with it, they'll be abused, everything will be wrong, the person will take advantage of them, and they'll never leave. Or if they do leave, they're going to have somebody waiting in the wings. They might have a couple other people they already have lined up. So if they leave, it's more than one day they're to another person to make up if they get kicked out of this relationship. The heart is the fear of rejection, abandonment, not measuring up. See, from their point of view is the reason it's not working is I didn't do enough. So they'll keep doing more and more and more and more. Great amounts of stuffed anger. See, the only way to survive is attaching themselves to a rescuer who usually can't swim. They latch on with remarkable speed. This is another one of the characteristics. They can meet this person and they are madly in love and everything within a day. A you owe me attitude toward the world, so they cannot see their own selfishness. Others in these relationships feel smothered. Just ask the other person, do you feel smothered? They're going to feel smothered because this person is so needy. It'd be another characteristic to look for. That person's going to say, they're just so needy. This type of person is going to do what? Call them at work 10 times in one day. Just to talk to them, for no reason to talk. Drive them absolutely crazy. There are usually other addictions involved because they're going to medicate their emotions, aren't they? They see life as one big dysfunctional family, and they feel they have to be good enough to be loved. They attach to very needy people, abusive or emotionally distant people, and try to fix them. What type of codependency would this be like the most? The dependent rescuer. Sex is sometimes despised, but is given to get the relationship, and the main goal is to keep the relationship going. That again is what we call relationship addiction. Remember the story of Samson in our first session? I'm guessing he probably had relationship addiction as well as sexual addiction. Now let's look at sexual addiction. One of the books on sexual addiction is actually entitled False Intimacy. Because what is a sexual addict trying to do? Feel loved. And let's face it, sex sort of feels like love, doesn't it? So if you're having a lot of sex, you feel this person must really care for him. Of course, what could we really have? Two sexual addicts simply using each other. Here's a definition. The engagement in an uncontrollable, repetitive sexual behavior, sexual preoccupation or compulsion when sex is used as a coping mechanism. Note that the fear of sex or sexual anorexia is also an addiction, and it can preoccupy the person. So it could be wanting sex all the time, but it could be afraid of sex on the other side, one of the two ditches. Here are the symptoms. Secretive, no intimacy really involved. It could just be a fence post for all they care. No real relationship. Victimizing, ends in despair, used to escape pain or problems. Here's a statement. Whenever the first steps to relationship are physical or sexual, the warning signs of addiction are flashing. If you watch some of the stuff on TV, what's the implication? What do they seem to say? Everybody that gets together has sex on the first date, right? What did this just tell us? That's a red flag. Actually, when we teach people how to date, what do we tell them? We tell them that this is a race in which you have 5 horses on your chariot, the 5 types of intimacy. And if you want a healthy relationship, you keep all of those horses even. See, what happens if the commitment horse is still in the gate and the sexual horse has finished the race. What happens to your chariot? It's laying smashed all over the field. And that's how this kind of stuff destroys relationships. It doesn't build relationships. It really doesn't meet the needs. It artificially meets the needs in a very short-term basis. Remember? Short-term gain, long-term loss. And this one is the favorite of the church. Why? You don't have to go out and buy the drug, do you? And what's really put down in the church? Sexuality. So it has more shame. So it makes it stronger in the church. Number of people that are dealing with sexual addictions. Here are some of the factors you need to take into account. There is a biological and neurological part of this. You might not think about this. You think, well, no, that's not a chemical addiction. It really is, because it triggers the endorphins, it triggers adrenaline in the person, and it actually can be as addicted. They've actually done brain scans, and they can see the changes in the brain due to this type of an addiction. Another thing that's important is the person programs targets. It's a little bit of a gross story, but I'm going to give it to you anyway because you need to understand how powerful this is. In California, they did an experiment. They took 20 men, and they showed them a picture of a nude woman with black boots on. And they had them masturbate to that picture. Then they took the girl out of the picture, and within 1 month, all 20 men were turned on to black boots. They got sexually turned on when they saw black boots. That's how programmable this is. And that's why you have all these weird things going on. Another story was a young boy on a ranch, and the house was pretty creaky and so on, and other people sort of knew when he was masturbating, so he would go out to the barn. And when he was standing in the barn, where are you going to look? Well, he looked down at his feet, and he had cowboy boots on. And he developed a fetish for cowboy boots for the rest of his life. He had large collections of cowboy boots. We had a guy in our sexual addiction group. He wasn't interested in women, he was interested in women's panties. Because he got a sexual turn on from their panties. He actually said that he was part of a gang that was actually raping women. He only wanted their panties. He didn't want the women. So you have all these interesting, weird things. You've heard interesting stories, I'm sure, and we have different levels of sexual addiction, and they come from this programming. So we're going to have to deal with that also, aren't we? Parts of this whole thing: programming targets, operant conditioning, depression, deprivation of social, spiritual, sexual, fun, and love. All of these addictions end up consuming the person so much that they lose the rest of their life. They lose their other relationships. They get so focused on these things that nothing else really matters. We call that dissipation. The rest of your life sort of just flies out the window, and pretty soon this totally consumes the person. Physiological dependence, escape or entertainment, medicating, lack of intimacy, trauma. Spiritually, what does it do to you? What did it do to Samson? Burned out his spiritual eyes, right? And eventually the Spirit of God was no longer with him when he lost his faith, when he was in chains of brass. Either your spirituality is going to overcome this, or this is going to overcome your spirituality. And then the addictive ritual cycle. This is really important that you get a hold of it, because this ritual becomes very set, and they go through certain things. Why is this so important? Because if you understand the ritual, you can break the ritual, and you can break the thing from happening. First thing it starts with, here's the cycle. Pain agent. Emotions, conflict, stress, lack of intimacy from the family of origin. That's the first thing. That leads to preoccupation in the person's mind. They start thinking about it, right? If they're not thinking about it, we're never going to get there. We'll find out this is a way to stop it. Then disassociation. They disconnect from the outside world. If they're not really disconnecting, you really don't have a full-blown sexual addict. Then they go into an altered state. They check out, they're in a fantasy world, or they're into pornography, and that's all they're interested in. It's like they're in a different life. That's all they see. Then after that pursuing behavior, they've now built it up in their mind to such a degree that they can't really stop themselves. They're already on the downhill. The snowball is already growing speed as it goes down. And now they're going to go out and whatever their target is, whatever their method is of acting out, they have to satiate that drive that they've built up inside of themselves. They have the behavior, and it can be very different. It medicates the emotions, and the timing can be different here. Some sexual addicts only act out every 3 months or once a month. But most often, once this takes over, the flesh takes over to such a degree that it just consumes them, and that's all that they really have left. And then, of course, despair and pain, and now what do they need to medicate? Same thing, right? So now we're back in the cycle. We go around that cycle. And this is so set. As an example, if you have a guy, let's say his problem is pornography and he's a traveling salesman, that you'll be able to tie down, okay, before he leaves on his trip, he's going to set aside some money so his wife won't get it on the credit card. Because he knows that when he goes to the hotel, he's going to look at one of those movies that you have to pay for in the hotel, and he needs to pay cash for that. He's already preparing before he left. And then he knows that he's going to, from there, walk down, go to the red light district, and sleep with a prostitute. And then he's going to feel terrible about it. He's going to cover it all up. And he's going to tell himself it's never going to happen again. And what do you think is going to happen? That's going to become a cycle over and over and over again, and almost getting embedded in his brain. That's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. But this can be in any direction depending on what the problems are that we're dealing with here. What are the building blocks of sexual addiction? And we're actually going to have 4 levels of sexual addiction that we're talking about. The first building blocks are fantasy, pornography, and masturbation. Almost all sexual acts, although I've had an exception, one of them that did not have the pornography, but they almost all have all of those, because those are ways that they can learn to disassociate. Those are ways that they can medicate their emotions in a sexual way, and they're not really touching anyone else, right? Here's a little interesting aside in the area of masturbation. And realize that most men struggle with that, most women don't, okay? But what most men don't know is that what they call type A masturbation, people have never masturbated. There are certain societies in which that's such a wimpy thing to do that no one does it. Then what they call type B. Type B has to be where this person isn't fantasizing, they're not disassociating, they're not disconnecting in the masturbation. And then type C, which most people struggle with, is with the fantasy, with the disconnecting, with the pornography and all the other kind of stuff associated with it. Because this starts so early is one of the reasons it's very hard to overcome. Because hey, kid was 12 years old, started masturbating, or saw his first Playboy, and so on and so forth. And so it builds up, and this is by the time you get them as a client. How long have they been doing this? How deep are the grooves in their brain already? Their rituals already set up, and all the other kind of things that we're talking about here. But it acts very much like other addictions. Poor self-image, mood-altering coping swings, entitlement, efforts to control the unmanageability, denial, delusions, blaming, shame, double life, loneliness, self-hatred, resentment toward God, increasing preoccupation with sex, downward spiral in life, and sometimes suicide. That's how powerful this is. It kicks off endorphins in the brain. Those are the pleasure feelings that you have in your brain. Another thing about sexual addiction is the worse it is, the more it violates your morals, the more you're afraid of getting caught, the more you are going to get a sexual high from it. And of course, powerlessness that goes on. And because of tolerance, the addiction progresses to destruction, withdrawal from society. They feel they can't live without it. The average sexual addict feels that sex is their biggest need and they can't live without it at all. And of course, love is supplanted by lust. This really isn't real love. This is just lust. It's just getting the feeling. There is no relationship involved in what is going on here. What are the levels of sexual addiction? The first level is if you have simply masturbation, pornography, or fantasy. That's level 1. Level 2, if it's with somebody else, they're acting out with an actual person of some sort. It could be a consenting partner or even the wife, especially when they act out compulsively with each other, including nude bars, a string of affairs, all of those kind of things. But notice something about level 2. Although it's acting out, it's not acting out illegally. Where level 3 is acting out illegally. Exhibitionism, voyeurism, indecent liberties, obscene phone calls, bestiality, all of those kind of things. Notice how these are getting worse as we go along? How does that happen? Well, on the internet, you'll find out that they're set up to happen that way. The person goes this far, they need a higher high, so it takes them to a next level. They cross a boundary, and now they're hooked on that level, and it just keeps taking them deeper and deeper because, let's be honest, this doesn't work. You know, this is never going to fulfill a person. This just makes them feel worse and worse and worse about themselves. And then finally, victimizing others, which is level 4, rape, incest, child molestation, those kind of things. Now we need to add one more thing to this as we're talking about it, and that is homosexuality. It's a particular type, but it has a very interesting piece to it. And that is that we have not only a sexual addict, but we have a sexual addict that has identity confusion. Identity confusion means that the person as a kid wasn't able to accept his own identity. Maybe his father was abusive, maybe he couldn't live up to his father's expectations. A girl's mom in one case was an alcoholic during that time. She never connected to her mom, and so they've never connected, and so for the rest of their life, the reparative drive is they're trying to connect to that same sex. They're trying to get an identity. It's very difficult. So it's a lot easier to invent an identity that doesn't exist called being gay. And of course, all addicts justify themselves. And so what do they say? I've always been this way. Well, this occurs around age 3. How many remember what happened to you at age 3? And so they tried to say it's genetic. They tried to say that it always was that way, and that's just the way God made me, because if it was, that means I'm not doing anything wrong, and they don't have the guilt. And so they're trying to cope with it in whatever way that they can possibly cope with it to make it happen. The problem is we now have 2 problems. We have the sexual addiction, and we have the identity confusion, and we have a third problem. There's a very strong spirit that goes along with this, that makes it very, very strong. And so it's a very difficult thing to take out of. They're dealing with 2 to 3 types of problems, and how hard is it just to get out of the addiction in the first place? If you read anything about this, it'll sort of blow your mind of how powerful this type of a thing is. Now, all addictions have consequences, but particularly homosexuality has more than usual. The average homosexual lifespan is 43 years. And only about 2% of homosexuals live to 62. Why? Because of AIDS, but also suicide and other things. It's that damaging to the person. And so this is a really strong, very powerful thing, very difficult thing for people to deal with. And of course, a lot of people say you can't get out of it, you just have to accept it. That's not true, but it is very difficult. And those that I've worked with, it's been a real struggle. And it can take a long time. But just like any other addictions, it's a real struggle. And of course, we realize that God is really the answer in this whole thing. If you want to get something even stronger, pedophilia. If you have what's called a fixated pedophile. We're not going to go into a lot of detail. If you take our course on anger management, domestic violence, and abuse, we spend whole sessions just on this particular problem. But it's powerful enough to understand they had to pass laws. Basically, we now track all pedophiles for the rest of their life. You have to announce where you're living, and if you can't break it, and you don't think you have any hope, they just lock you up in a hospital for the rest of your life. You never get out. That's how strong this can be. Now why? Because part of the basis is you have a problem in the past and the person's locked into that particular age. And they now have targeted, and they basically have built up that sexual addiction, that target at that particular age, because that's where they were stopped in their development. The way they see it is they're just playing house with somebody else of their own age. They tend to only relate to kids. And this is very, very powerful. All of these things are very, very powerful and hard to break. But these last two are probably more powerful than usual. Get the picture. Now let's talk about assessment. Okay, how are we going to figure out if you have somebody like this that comes in and you're going to try and sort out where they're at, what is really going on? What are you going to look for? Here's a list. First, get them to describe the problem. Then, when did it begin? Because you might find that there was trauma or something else that happened at that particular age. As an example, it's not unusual that as a boy they were homosexually raped, or they got involved in a homosexual relationship or something. And then that's when they really began. Or another reason might be they were introduced to sex very early in their life. Or another reason is sex was looked at as very dirty and worthless as I grew up. And so I have a lot of shame about that. Or there was abuse of something else that happened in their life as they grew up. History. Fixated trauma. Why are we looking at that? Again, that's the pedophile, isn't it? Problems with mom or dad. Emotional incest. That's when an adult uses a kid as their emotional sounding board. They tell them all the things that's going on, their problems with the father, or the father with the mother, or something like that. Abandonment. Fear of intimacy or rejection. Then a sexual history. Early introduction to sex, pornography, masturbation, fantasy, acting out. Sexual taboos. Sexual encouragement. Had a particular client, and this was going to be hard for us to believe, but there was such a fear of intimacy in the family that when this boy would get interested in girls, they would give him money to see prostitutes. Fear of relationships or rejection. Sexual shame situations. Extensive sexual experience, affairs. Sexual abuse. Sometimes sex equals love. To them, there's no difference. If I get sex, a one-night stand, that's love, like I was in a relationship for 20 years. Just the feelings. And of course, this is all false intimacy, isn't it? Fixated sexual trauma. Sexual pairing. What is pairing? Something happens along with something. As an example, one of the worst of these is when there's pain that is attached to sex. That's where you end up with sadomasochism. Because it was paired before, so now those things are linked. And so the person actually gets, when they have pain, they actually get turned on sexually. That's why this makes sort of complicated and interesting stuff that is going on. You want to find out what is the function. And this is really important. One of the things that I will usually do, because I learned the hard way to do this, is I will want to know what their sexual fantasies are. And then from the sexual fantasies, I'll want to learn, because that will teach you what it is that's underlying this. What is its function? As an example, let's just take an example here. You have a client, and their sexual addiction in their fantasies, it's always a well-known movie star that is absolutely perfect in how they look, and this well-known movie star always is chasing them and wants their body. Now, what is that telling us? When you go back to self-worth, significance, love, and security, what's that telling us? What are they medicating? Significance. If that kind of a person wanted me, then I must really be something, right? I must really, but so you can look, because fantasies are freeform. You can make any fantasy up you want. So therefore the fantasies tell you what the person is medicating and how this actually functions in their life. And in most cases, from those fantasies, you can figure out what you're dealing with in the sexual addiction. You also want to find out when they do it. How needy are they? And finally, we usually will do a faith ladder. Remember, the faith ladder is, when do you think you're ever going to recover? Is it going to be when you're 85? Is it going to be 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 5, 3, 2, 1? How much do they believe they can never get out of this trap? Because that's critical. If you don't believe you're going to get out of it, you're not going to do what you need to do to get out of it. Okay, now let's get down to some real meat here. How are we going to treat this? How are we going to help these people? And this is going to be a little bit more complicated. Later on, I'm going to explain the 12 steps to you and some other methods, that we have general methods for dealing with addictions. But in this case, we have to add in some new things to try to help these people, because we have some new factors when we're dealing especially with sexual addiction and some of these other issues. So I'm going to give you 10 steps, or 10 things to do here treating these particular people, or 10 different issues that we need to do when we're dealing with addictions of love. The first one is take responsibility. How many people do you think say, well, if my wife had just met my sexual needs, then I wouldn't be having this problem? They're going to try to come up with different reasons, different excuses, but these are their actions. This is their attempt to medicate their emotion. This is their attempt to meet all the rest of their intimacy needs with 1 out of the 5. Accountability to deal with the flesh, lust, and building blocks of addiction. What do I mean? If you're a pornography addict, you need to take some action here and get a filter, or get rid of your computer, or do something, get rid of your Playboy magazines anyway. Do something to work those things out. Next one, decide to quit. Just because they come to you, does that mean that they've decided to quit? Probably not. This is their best friend. This is what makes life worth living. This is their God. Remember Dagon in the story of Samson? Dagon was the Philistine sex god of fertility. That was his God. You have to expose the sins, the lies, help them to understand the difference between lust and love, the lies of pornography. They have to get a revelation. One of my clients finally got a revelation in this area, and he was at work, and they had a Playboy hanging right on the wall. Well, he can't take it down or anything, but there was a salesman there looking at the Playboy, and he walks by the salesman and says, "You can't take her home." He had like 3 or 4 meanings in that. First, you can't have her Playboy. Second one, she isn't real. You really can't take her home. This isn't a real relationship. You getting high on our Playboy is just false intimacy. It's ridiculous. That piece of paper can't do anything for you. But see, he had learned that, and he had to get to this step to do that. They also need to learn that sex is not bad. There's nothing wrong with sex. Sex, just like anger, is a gift of God, and if we use it wrong, it gets a bad rap. And if we use it right, it is very pleasurable, very useful, exactly what God intended. But you have to use it correct. You almost have to give people permission and to be in sexual acts to be sexual, but sexual in a right way, not in a wrong way. Number 3, the acting out must stop. Because if it doesn't stop, are you ever going to win this battle? Remember the good dog, bad dog story? What are you doing? You're feeding the flesh, you're feeding the bad dog, and if you continue to feed the bad dog, he's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger and take over. And so at some point you have to stop. Again, whatever it takes. Long-term abstinence is a very interesting one. See, you might think that the hardest thing for a guy would be to not have a wife and to be single, right? Not the case. Because if he will abstain over a period of time, that sexual desire will get less and less and less. But if the person is married, now we have sex all the time, it's harder to control that than it is for the long-term abstinence. So sometimes what we'll do at this particular step is we will ask the guy to fast, because fasting breaks the flesh, right? And we'll ask him to fast sex for a significant period of time, like 40 days. What's he going to find out? He didn't die, did he? He actually made it for 40 days, and actually he could control it, and it actually decreased. So he doesn't have to have it like he thinks he has to have it. Another thing that sometimes if a person's really hooked on this is we'll get them an antidepressant. Because antidepressants, especially Prozac and some of the other antidepressants, will knock down your sexual desire by about 50%. So we can help the person get a leg up on this thing so they're not so driven and they're not so controlled by this. But somehow you have to get them to stop. Number 4, a 12-step program of some sort. Because the 12-step program is going to address all of these different issues. And we'll show you that when we talk about 12 steps here in the future. But basically, it's going to deal with their denial. It's going to deal with their faith. Remember this all from Samson? It's going to deal with their shame. And it's going to deal with them finally dying to themselves to be willing to give up this addiction. And so we want them to be in that support group, to have the support and the accountability and to deal with these issues in their life. Next, identifying and stopping the ritual. Because if you don't stop the ritual, we have this groove. And it's going to be real easy. One thing comes up and they're back in this ritual and they're already down the grease slide crashed. But if we can teach them to do one thing different, we can stop the ritual. Now to do that, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to find out what the ritual is. And you're going to have to analyze it, and then you're going to have to figure out ways to block that ritual from happening. Like that guy going on that trip. What if he doesn't take any money with him and only takes a credit card and a checkbook, which he knows his wife is going to find out about? Do you think that might slow him down a little bit? Then begin reprogramming the lusts. Those sexual targets need to be reprogrammed to what? Valid sexual targets. His wife. I had one particular program suggest when you're having sex, leave the lights on, look at your wife's face, so you're connecting now to your wife instead of the boots. Somehow we got to get him turned on to his wife instead of turned on to black boots or cowboy boots. They need to be reprogrammed. And that's extremely important in the area of pedophiles or in the area of homosexuals. They have to be reprogrammed. And that's going to take some work. Next, find and deal with the fear of intimacy. In almost all of these cases, these people feel, if you knew me, you would reject me and you wouldn't like me. And that's why they can't be intimate, they can't open up, they can't be honest with other people, and that's why they're medicating with using one type, sex, physical love, to meet the needs of the rest of it. Number 8, deal with the emotional connections. Ever hear of soul ties? You can have connections. If this person's had 5 affairs, there are different things in the spirit that need to be dealt with and need to be worked through. Number 9, discipleship. These people need someone to take them alongside, to coach them, to disciple them of what it's like to be a real Christian man, and to develop long-term relationships. What do they not have? Long-term relationships. They don't have healthy relationships, and so we need to get them real healthy relationships where they can connect in a right way rather than a wrong way. Very important in homosexuality, very important in pedophiles, very important almost in all of this, that you have that discipleship phase. And finally, true intimacy with God. Because what is God? Love. He's got the real thing, and He will never reject them, and He will never hurt them, and He will never abandon them. And so the ultimate answer for this is the relationship with God. How many of you have ever heard of Exodus International? It's a group that brings people out of homosexuality. If you go to one of their conferences, what do you find? It's all praise and worship. It's all like regular church services. Because what do they need? That homosexual has to connect to God as their father and Jesus as their model. And so it's all praise and worship, relationship with God over and over again, because that's the only way they're going to get out of all of these kind of things. Passages of recovery. There are certain stages that the client is going to go through as you find recovery. The developing stage: unmanageability, powerlessness, forced acknowledgement of the problems. Then they go to crisis decision stage. Are they really willing to quit? Usually the case is, I'll quit this much, but I'll keep this much. I'll quit this much, and maybe a little bit over a period of time. They'll quit in steps. The shock stage, the first 8 months coming to grips with the problem, because they don't realize the magnitude of the problem of how much this is destroying them until they quit doing it. Then all of a sudden the lights come on and they just can't believe what they're going through, and also the struggles. They're going to have to learn new coping skills to replace these old ones. The grief stage. How much do you think they've lost by now? When our addiction groups for alcohol and drugs, we usually ask that question and have them added up. It usually comes out like $250,000. Just from all the money they've lost, the jobs they've lost, the programs they had to go through, and all the other kind of things. And finally, going through that whole grief, feeling new ways, the repair stage: spiritual growth and mind and emotions, healthy relationships, capacity for joy. Remember one particular guy I was working with, and he came in and said, I felt joy for the first time. Never in his life had he felt joy. And he finally felt joy because he was finally free, and he actually could have that emotion. See, one of the problems you have is if you bury your negative emotions and kill those, what also do you kill? Your positive emotions. And of course, you end up in this huge emotional roller coaster, and this huge mess in your life turns into that unmanageable disaster that you can't even imagine how bad this can all get. Because this stuff will just take over your life. Let's pray. Lord, we realize that this is one of the devil's most powerful things to use against Christians, and that's why so many Christians fall. But Lord, you are the answer. You are the way. You are the truth. You are the life. And we ask that you would give us wisdom in helping ourselves, helping others to be set free, that they might become all that you want them to be. In Jesus' name, amen.